if you don't feel a connection to any non-monogamous concepts and you've looked into it and you really make that choice to be monogamous with your partner, that's a beautiful thing. And that can be a wonderful and fulfilling and rich way to live your life. But for us, the most, the authentic way that we can live our life with ourselves is to be non-monogamous.
Welcome to the Heart of It. We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. Today's episode is a conversation about non-monogamy, conscious relationships, and sexuality. We are joined by the hosts of the Evolving Love podcast, Abby and Liam. These two have been together for over 13 years and have been consensually non-monogamous for 11 of those years. And they are loving parents.
They are. And it was a chat that I was really, really surprised by, because I know we've had somewhat similar guests on before, and it is a bit of a touchy subject for a lot of people.
Yep.
It feels very dangerous. It feels wrong to some people. And I really understand that point of view in one sense. But after talking to Abby and Liam, it's not that I now want to be non-monogamous, but the way they talk about it with so much love and care and consideration, and why they are in a ethical non-monogamous relationship, it really makes sense. And I think it's just it makes sense for them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's just about staying curious and open to all sorts of relationships. And that's something that I know you and I really want to encourage people to have, just to have the curiosity to what other people's lives are about.
Indeed. Well, we got into the heart of it with these two.
We did.
Let's have a listen to Abby and Liam.
Okay, well, welcome you to the Heart of It. Thank you so much for coming in and just exploring this really interesting topic. We've had a couple of other couples on that have explored non-monogamy and been very positive about it. They have very much felt so. So we just want to kind of get your journey into it. How did it begin for the both of you, this ethical non-monogamy?
ENM.
There you go.
It's that's part of when I looked you guys up. I'm looking at all these new terms.
There's lots of acronyms.
There are a lot of
acronyms.
Yeah,
and
a lot of new words.
Into the specificity of it. Fascinating. Anyway, how did it go? How did it begin?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. The way that this unfolded for Liam and I was, when we first got together, we were in a monogamous relationship, and that was back in 2012. And from the early days of our relationship, we were very just open with our communication, and sort of we wanted to cultivate and build a relationship where we could essentially talk about anything. So anything that might come up, or if in the future somebody might get a crush on somebody, or if there's some sort of fear or, that you want to raise, or if there's some desire or kink that maybe you can't, you might feel a bit shy to talk about. We've always wanted to have the type of relationship where we could at least have those conversations, whether or not we act on them or not.
Yeah.
And it was actually from that place of sharing and connecting and being really open with our communication that we just sort of created a space where we could start to, have these conversations. And then we just sort of organically started cultivating our own type of relationship. But the thing that was really interesting, I think, for us was, without having the language and the terminology, we both found that we were very compersive people, which compersion, it's a big word in non-monogamy. It's like often positioned as the opposite of jealousy. It's like this sort of excitement.
I heard this word for the first time the other day. That's so interesting. Yeah, great. Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of a foundational sort of emotion or feeling where you feel, if there's a scenario that might often cause jealousy, instead of feeling that jealousy, you might feel excitement or happiness for your partner's connection with somebody else or pleasure. So even though we weren't acting on that and we didn't have the language around it, certain scenarios that I thought of that might make me jealous, I was like, actually, I'm finding this to be quite a positive thing that I'm experiencing. And then when I shared that with you, you
Yeah,
felt similarly.
Yeah, we both really felt on the same page. As soon as we started to have those initial conversations, it was amazing how aligned we actually were. And I think from that point, we started to then look at how it would look actually exploring these things with other people.
Do you think it comes from your upbringing? Did you have an upbringing that was extremely strict, or perhaps the opposite? Like, where does that come from with the both of you?
For me, I've had a very, like, I wasn't brought up in a religious family or anything like that. And I've always had very clear lines of communication about things with my parents. So I didn't feel sort of concerned, too much. And I think because it was Liam and I together, I didn't have a sort of an element of shame for thinking about this. It felt like something just different and interesting that we could explore. And for Liam, you had...
Yeah, I never really had this kind of a strong religious background, so there wasn't anything that I had to unpack when it comes to like a religious standpoint.
Right.
And I think I grew up in a very kind of judgment-free household about different relationships, so I didn't necessarily feel any kind of strictures around, it's a bad thing to think about these things, so it really just allowed us to have these very open conversations with each other without that element, as Abby was saying, of that kind of any shame pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how has your relationship changed since you decided to be non-monogamous? What's happened for the both of you?
Well, a big thing for us was when you start to explore these types of things, it's a very tempting thing to kind of jump into the deep end of non-monogamy. So to go, I'm going to start dating everyone, we're going to do all the things, we're going to go to all the parties and just be really explorative. But what we wanted to do was very consciously move into those spaces. So for us, it was actually very important to kind of talk about all the theoretical things, like different kind of almost like game planning, what it would look like if we were to invite someone else into the relationship or to have these experiences with other people. Yeah. So for us, it was like we were trying to kind of temper some of our initial excitement, because it isn't a really exciting thing when you start to open up. And to just have this like very open line of communication so that we could really get into the nitty gritty of how we were responding, even hypothetically, to situations that might arise.
Because at that point, it would be hypothetical, and also when you're faced with the actual truth of it. I mean, it's one thing to say, "Yeah, honey, I'm fine with it." You go, and suddenly Barry's in the picture. Or maybe it's not Barry. Maybe it's
could be Bertha.
Brittany. And you're going, now I'm actually. Oh, this is actually happening, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm watching my partner do it. That's a different thing to go from hypothetical to action.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to meet the right Barry. It's one of those things where, like, we had a kind of a very solid unit with each other, like a very monogamous unit. And then we were living in New York at the time. And part of the thing was like, how do we meet other people in a really ethical way so that we can explore some of these ideas? So to meet a Barry or a Bertha or, whoever it might be, we were kind of initially started going to different events and talks, and we went to some Esther Perel talks, and she was talking about,
her.
and we love Esther Perel.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of kind of meeting people organically who also practice this type of relationship, which opened the doors for us.
And that was something that really surprised us as well, because it's when you hear about non-monogamous relationships, you can often think, it's looking outwards, or it's only about sex or this or that. But for us, it was like really looking deeper into our own relationship and who we are and all of the different things that come up when you're starting to explore this and have these conversations. And it sort of, led us down the path of just being so curious about relationships in general.
So you've been together 13 years.
Yes.
And your 11 years of that has been non-monogamous. And you're still clearly together.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. What is it about you that you want to stay together, and not just go off and be with those partners that you have been with? What draws you back to each other all the time?
Well, we have a deep companionship and a shared life together, and we are lovers. We are a married couple. Like, we are very, very close. And like, we still hold a lot of those, like, I want to grow old with Liam. Like, that is something that we treasure. That is like very, very dear to our heart and important to us. Now, because of who we are and because we can, navigate this in this way, I feel like we can actually, we can hold the space for non-monogamy as well. And there is that deep commitment to each other that in many ways I feel like I'm very committed to Liam. I'm not committed to monogamy. And that it's actually this sort of the way that we navigate our relationship sort of reinforces that closeness. It's sort of like, not that it's an antidote to anything, but it's sort of, for me, it brings us actually a sense of deeper security into the relationship.
And in preparation for this interview, I was listening to one of your episodes, and Cam, you made the point that every day you wake up and choose to be married to each other. It's like a very conscious choice. Yep. And I think for us, any non-monogamous explorations, it's a very conscious discussion. We don't just fall into these situations. It's very deliberate. And even our commitment to each other, we're just consciously choosing every day we wake up and go, this is great. This is beautiful. We have so much love and support for each other. Like, let's just keep writing this beautiful thing out.
Yeah.
I find it hard to get my head around.
Yeah,
I
for
do,
sure.
because the idea of sharing a sexual life with somebody else, or having Ali do the same thing, Al's my person, so if you're bringing someone else in, like Abby, I'll use you as an example. So, and Mel Barry's going to come into the relationship. How do you work on being that emotional intimacy? Or do you temper that? And then do you tell Barry stuff that you don't tell Liam? And I would find that very hard. And then say if there's another one, let's say Chris has joined as well. I mean, I don't know how that, you can explain to me how that works. But that sort of sharing your heart and being there, clearly it's with you two. Is it also with Barry? And could it be with Chris?
Yeah, so the way that we practice our non-monogamy, we're not full on practicing polyamory where we're maintaining these, very in-depth like partner building relationships in the same way that we have our marriage. Like we have our marriage, we have our partnership, and our connections with other people, whilst very meaningful and quite, long lasting. It's more like a deep friendship that does have an intimacy element to it as well.
Okay.
And we're very honest with, anybody who we would potentially be dating, with partners, where it's like, I'm not going to be building a life in the same way. And I think it's really understandable that you would feel like you can't understand how to comprehend this, because when you're in a monogamous relationship and that's sort of the framework that you understand, sometimes people can think that it's like having double of that. So it's like, how do you have the time?
Yes.
How do you have the emotional bandwidth? How do you have double of that?
Yeah.
We don't have double of this.
Yeah.
This is our marriage.
Okay. Do you feel the same way?
I mean, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to this, in particular with the masculinity piece as well, because I think there's so much social conditioning that teaches us to be super possessive of our partner. Like the most in love we can be is to fight off any possible suitors. Like if someone looks at Abby in a weird way, there's this like kind of trope of chasing after that person and proving your love for your partner. And I think once you start to really interrogate some of those things, you can start to think about, like what of that is like down to kind of patriarchy potentially, or kind of the social conditioning of monogamy. Like we grow up and we're just told, you should be in a monogamous relationship, and whether that's down to religion or just society conditioning. And I think once you start interrogating some of these things and trying to kind of decouple it a little bit, as Abby was saying, like we think about things, we start at everything as a friendship level. And when you were saying, like you probably have really beautiful conversations with your close guy friends or female friends that you have in your life. And for us, like, you probably might not necessarily feel threatened by those really beautiful emotional friendships that you have with others. And for us, the sex or intimacy on top of that is just really an extension of that connection. So we're just open to that extension, I guess.
I think it's probably, it probably gets a bad name in the sense that when you've got like the cults where it's like it's one man, you know what I mean? The polyamory cult where it's one man with 25 16-year-olds, where it's like people immediately would probably go, oh, this is what you're into? You know what I mean? Where you're talking about something very, very, very different to that. It's like the complete opposite end to that. So, yeah, it's getting past, being open and to getting past what the idea of it is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because
too.
you get one chance at a first impression.
Yeah.
You know, and if the first impression is some culty movie that you've watched, you know, Jim Jones and drinking the cordial,
For sure.
the Kool-Aid, you know, it's sort of that sort of thing. Well, that's what this is, and it's a lot easier. I think it's a lot easier to reconcile something by throwing it into a label and just throwing it into that. So what you're talking about, it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah.
And
collaborative.
And the language is very specific. Like when we talked to you said a lot of acronyms, a lot of. Do you find yourself going, are you thinking about it a lot? Because there's so many things to sort of. I mean, do you talk about it all the time?
Look, we don't talk about it all the time. We have other things happening in our life, and we're parents as well.
Yes,
so
that's another thing. We do want to see how that works.
Yeah. So we don't talk about it all the time, but it is something that we enjoy talking about, and we do like to, push our edges a little bit and see where things are at. And in the context of non-monogamy, there is always something to talk about. So, even if it's revisiting something, in our mind, a memory that happened years ago, and how we would sort of connect with that now if we were to do it, if we were to be different or not. So there is always an interesting aspect of it. And I think, as well as, there is that cult association, as you were saying. I think that there can also be that resistance to hearing about non-monogamy too, because often the only sort of framework that a lot of people have for non-monogamy is if there is, it's a story of infidelity. It's a story of pain. We only sort of hear about these specific types of, scenarios where there's some sort of betrayal. And I think it is a way of being where when people do hear it, they put themselves in that situation and sort of
in the victim
imagine
spot
or just how
both.
they might feel if it was them. And because they don't have that compersion and they don't have that understanding and that point of reference, it can feel uncomfortable. And that's why I think it is good to have a chat about these things, because nothing is black and white.
And it is important for there to be representation of different relationship structures. And this is why we talk about it through our podcast, and why we're really interested in talking to people with, all across the spectrum. We've had biblical scholars that we've talked to about non-monogamy and how they would feel about it. And, we've talked to people who are monogamous, because that's another thing, is the misconception that because we're talking about non-monogamy, we're like crusaders for like everyone joining the cult of non-monogamy, which is absolutely not the case.
It's a great name for a band, though.
Yeah, that would be a great, maybe your next band could be called the Crusaders.
You're not trying to convince
The cult
everyone.
of non-monogamy.
Oh, there we go. We're going to steal that for our new theme tune. But I think it is really important that we say that, because we know so many wonderful monogamous people in beautiful monogamous relationships. And the thing that we really care about is that people are consciously choosing monogamy. It's like you were saying, like if you don't feel a connection to any non-monogamous concepts and you've looked into it and you really make that choice to be monogamous with your partner, that's a beautiful thing. And that can be a wonderful and fulfilling and rich way to live your life. But for us, the most, the authentic way that we can live our life with ourselves is to be non-monogamous.
We had an amazing sex historian on the podcast, her and her mum, who wrote this amazing book, like Sex Through the History. And they were both like, nothing is new what's happening now. Everyone thinks that like this is new. This is this has been going on.
Well, monogamy is new.
Monogamy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Monogamy
this
is
has
the
been
newer.
going on for the kinks have all been happening. I mean, those Romans.
They were doing some crazy things.
Some serious stuff. So it was so interesting hearing them talk. It's like everyone thinks that this is this brand new idea of this, that, or whatever, and it's like, no, there's been all of this stuff happening. And I mean, they found, dildos that were like 2,000 years old. They're not usable still, but but they've been doing.
Clean them up, dust them off.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, they'd be dusty. So it's interesting. I find the whole exploration of it really interesting, that it's like people are thinking it's like, what's this new idea? It's like, it's been around a really long time.
Yep. That's very true.
I think I know the answer to this already. Can you ever see a time when you might turn around to each other and go, you know what, I think I just want you?
For sure.
And what if the other one says, yeah, I'm not ready for that?
I think it's like anything. It would be a conversation.
Yeah,
It
what I thought
it
you
would
were
not
gonna
be
say.
something that would take us off guard. Like we wouldn't accidentally end up in a situation where we're not really seeing eye to eye about talking about these things, because it is a communication.
We, in like the name of our podcast, Evolving Love, it's like evolving doesn't mean evolving to become more and more and more open to the point of, having very separate lives with separate partners. It's just that it's an unfolding, changing thing, also dependent on circumstances, what's happening in life, how busy we might be, health, hormones, like all of these things, play into things. So like we definitely have periods of time where we do close up a bit and we become a bit more monogamous, during pregnancy and during, having a newborn, and all of that was a very us time.
Right.
And then as things felt a little more, coming into a little bit more independence again in very slow ways, we started opening up again. So, we're not always expanding to the point of being extremely open. It's a very flexible, fluid situation.
And how old is you've got a boy, right?
Yeah, he's 6.
He's 6. What is, obviously you're very open communicators. How, is this something that you will feel you need to share with him at some point? I mean, does he meet your other partners, or how does that work in a parenting style?
So we have a very monogamous home. We don't live with other partners. We're not affectionate with other partners in front of him. That's not really what it's about for us. Not that we're deliberately trying to keep people at bay. Yeah. He has met different partners of ours, but in the framework of, there's a group of us with our friends and we're getting together with their children. We're having a barbecue. We're having that gathering. So everything is always age appropriate. Like Liam and I don't stand and make out with each other in front of him, and we wouldn't do that with other people in front of him. Sure. As he gets older, we will share with him in gentle ways. There's many different ways for people to have a relationship, but to us, the important thing is to be honest and to be in your integrity, and to also be who you are. So he knows that, he has a gay auntie and her partner. That's just normal to him. Yeah, he doesn't have any shame on anything like that. So, we're hoping that would be the same for relationships. Yeah.
So have you had any challenging situations with, like, or even, well, I'm sure not so much with the teachers, but certainly family members and possibly other parents or caregivers, Have there been situations where you've had challenges and even felt the need to explain, or how do you deal with those sort of things?
Well, I think because we have a public profile and we do appear in the media, like people know, at school drop-off, they probably go, those are the non-monogamous parents.
And Canberra's a small town.
It is a small town, but but what you start to realise with us speaking publicly is people are much more open-minded than you would think. And sometimes it's the people that you think would be the most close-minded. Like some of the parents of our son's friends who are very religious, once they've found out and we've had those discussions, we go, we have a podcast and, it's about non-monogamy and alternative relationships. They are beautifully inquisitive and they know us as parents, and they know that we are caring and loving parents and our son comes first. And the fact that we talk about this, it's not our whole life. Talking about non-monogamy isn't our whole life. And because they already have a frame of reference for us as parents, they go, they just do things a little bit differently and kind of move along with their day.
Yeah, we haven't come up against anything negative in our day-to-day life.
That's good.
It's online. That's where the crazy stuff
happens. Well, people sitting in the dark room.
You guys know.
Punching out on the keyboard.
What kind of stuff do you get? What sort of stuff do you get? Like, is it really bad?
Like, you shouldn't be parents. This isn't love.
Okay.
I'm Jesus without the morals.
Jesus without the morals.
That's a thing.
That was a good one.
That was a good one.
Another
sometimes
name for
it's
a
funny.
band. Another name for a band. Let's go with that.
We'll support your band, Kat.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the online commentary does range from very sad to like, funny. And so the witty kind of takedowns are the funny ones. Like, geez, like we were on the
That's
project.
our favorite.
We were on the project, and as part of the filming, I had to play soccer with our son. But the producer for the project, all he could find was a basketball, and I was like, oh no, that's going to look super weird playing basketball. And then so they filmed it, and then they put it on the project, and then all these comments were like, this idiot doesn't even know what a football is. And I was thinking, I know what a football is. It's cool. Like,
Yes, I do.
yeah. And I was like,
I'm a dribbler.
I know. I was trying to like, do I combat these comments?
No.
And at a certain point, you just have to. And I think it did affect. Like, I'm a sensitive person, and the criticisms on me as a father were very hard to hear.
Sure.
And because I really do. That's a huge part of my life and something I care deeply about. So I think those were in all seriousness quite difficult to kind of come across. Yeah.
Who do you find are the most outspoken? Is it the women or the men? Or is it fairly balanced in a negative way?
In a negative way. Oh, I feel like it's quite balanced.
Yeah.
I think it's fairly even-handed, but there is a demographic like kind of shift. So in particular, like on Facebook, I guess because it captures a lot of some older demographics. There was I would say a lot of the people were 50s plus.
Yep.
And this is also because they don't necessarily have a frame of reference maybe for non-monogamy. So just seeing the title Non-Monogamous Mother, I think was the title of the video, just triggered them so much.
Right.
Even without watching it, they would engage with it almost as if they knew who we were, how we approached things, and then they just have this kind of really intense reaction because, that maybe they had never had examples of this before.
Yeah. And I would imagine it's going to hit a nerve for those people who've been cheated on. They're going to go, oh, yeah, well, my husband was non-monogamous too because he cheated on me, which is very different to what you're talking about in your agreement. So,
Yeah, for sure.
What inspired you to start, I think I kind of know this, the Evolving Love podcast?
Well, I started sharing with some other mum friends of mine when we moved back to Canberra. And
When you said back, and where did you move back from?
we were in New York City for
That's a
6
big shift.
years. It was a big
New York
shift.
City to Canberra.
Yes.
And there's no slide on Canberra, but just moving from America to Australia is a big shift.
For sure, yeah. So moving back to Canberra, which is essentially a wonderful, fantastic cultural town. It's not a big city, but just sharing with other mum friends, and of course, we're with the babies. We talk about relationships and marriages, and everything sort of comes up. And I had a few friends that were like, do you and Liam, like, things seem really good. Like, what's sort of happening? And I decided to just be honest and share a little bit about our non-monogamous relationship. And I thought that I would be quite heavily judged. These were the sort of the high school friends. And instead I was met with a lot of curiosity and a lot of, that kind of makes sense the way you explain it, or I'd never considered it like that. And then I started writing about it, and I started a little private Instagram page, initially for women. And then that sort of grew, and, the thing with it was you could follow if you were a friend of a friend. So I liked the idea that a conversation would have had to have happened to be able to sort of follow along.
Yep.
And I just started writing about it and sharing about it. And I think the more that you can be yourself and share about these things, then other people who were, also non-monogamous and just keeping it quite under wraps, felt like sharing as well and reaching out. And there is a big community of non-monogamous people and non-monogamous parents, but it's very underground because the judgment is very high, and people feel protective of their love. They feel protective of their parenting.
But the community aspect is a big thing for us as well. And, we run regular conversation nights in Canberra and in Sydney as well. And we did one last night, actually, in Newtown. And what was incredible was that we deliberately kind of capped them to about 20 people come along. And people, for some of them, it's the first time they've ever been able to share about their non-monogamy in public without the feeling of being judged.
Right.
And it is a really powerful thing, like people going, I grew up in the church. Some of them are still involved in the church, but they have this side of them that they feel they can't really live authentic lives. And it's such a shame. And I think it is really important, and the work that Abby does with her writing on Substack and all this type of thing, like to destigmatize these alternative ways of doing things and to make people do it, just to allow them to feel seen, is such an important part of why we started Evolving Love as well. I think, just having these conversations with people and just, allowing people to kind of share these really unique experiences has been really powerful.
And I imagine that through these sort of evenings and the other community experiences with what you're talking about with the mothers group, that you've inspired people to open up and bring it into their lives.
Yeah, there have been people that have, decided to open up their relationship, or they're challenging their sort of ideas that they'd had about monogamy, because there can be, when we start talking about this stuff, then you can also turn to well, why are we monogamous? Is it because mum and dad were monogamous? Is it because, all of the couples on TV are monogamous in Disney and all of that?
Yeah,
so there can be a lot of,
there
can be a lot of sort of questioning that happens. But our conversation evenings also attract monogamous people as well, who like the idea of the sort of emotional work or exploration of emotionally exploring non-monogamy within the context of their relationship, because, sort of like living in that fantasy land, because it's like, just because something, you like the idea of something, or it's a fantasy of that you might have, you don't necessarily have to then bring that into reality. What sometimes works in the fantasy doesn't translate. So, yeah.
My fantasies always end up very bad. So I go down the road and I'll go down that road and go, what would happen if? And I go, that's not good. I'm not going down that road.
Yeah.
But is it enjoyable going down the road though?
You sometimes for a little bit, and then it's like, no, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
I want that.
Yeah.
I want that. Because
even if the fantasy is like me playing golf with you.
Oh no, that's a definite.
that's
I stay on that road.
That's a strong fantasy. Yeah.
It's what we might do. What we might do up in the bushes on the 13th hole.
There we go.
When we play, that might be fun. That's I can go with that one all the way.
I see. Have you had any with the podcast? Have you had any sort of surprising or particularly challenging guests that you don't have to name them, but anything that's been really hard or challenging to deal with?
Yeah, we had a really profound conversation with a guy called Andrew Gerzer. He's a disability advocate, and he's kind of a queer disabled. He's got multiple sclerosis, so he's wheelchair bound. He's in Canada.
Cerebral palsy.
And cerebral palsy, sorry. And so, it was quite an arresting conversation for us to have, talking about his ability to access, sex workers for his mental health, because that's the only way he can have these sexual interactions because of his disability. And I think conversations like that, I think we broke down in tears afterwards. Like it was it was just so, affecting on an emotional level, and just kind of highlighted the importance of talking to people who have very different experiences from your own. I think that for me was a really big conversation.
And he also identifies as somebody who is non-monogamous but isn't practicing non-monogamy. So it was very, so many interesting insights from him. I would say it hasn't happened often, but I think less so on the podcast, but sometimes with some people. I think where I sort of struggle sometimes in the conversation is if there are people who sort of say that this is a better way. If there are people who are like, polyamory is a more evolved way of being. It's a better way of being in a relationship. And I just don't connect with that at all. It's having a relationship is such an individual experience. You bring your whole history into it, and it's going to be different for everybody. So I don't connect with that.
Let's just assume for a moment that this is 101 first episode. Can you just you just mentioned, because I'm only asking you this because you mentioned polyamory. For me, who's not very well studied in this, certainly not experienced in it, what is the difference between polyamory and non-monogamous relationship?
So they all fall under the umbrella term of ethical non-monogamy. But people often use ethical non-monogamy or E&M now as this sort of way of like having friends where you might be intimate, like you'd have lovers, but it's not necessarily full on building a life together, committed relationship. Polyamory, polyamory is like many loving relationships, like many ongoing loving relationships.
Right.
So the umbrella term is ethical non-monogamy, but people casually use it as something that's a little bit not as escalated as polyamory as well. So different to swinging, like a bit more of a ongoing connections, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
But not full on polyamory. And then there's open relationship, and then there's don't ask, don't tell, and then
Right.
Well,
there's
don't ask.
all of these things.
Well, I guess that's certain. Don't ask, don't tell is there's an agreement there, isn't there?
Yes.
It's just, I guess the shit hits the fan when someone finds out. Don't ask, don't tell.
Well, I mean, it's an
That
arranged.
would be weird, wouldn't it?
Well, it's an interesting arrangement, and I mean, it is very ethically done in the sense that there's an agreement between the couple.
Well, that's the hope.
That they will get to experience this, these relationships, but there's just no kind of conversation directly addressing that with the partner. So it is a very complex landscape to navigate, and we don't practice a don't ask, don't tell. Obviously,
Yeah,
we're telling everything.
You're the opposite to that.
We love to share about things. You know, if
Yeah.
Liam goes on a date with somebody and has a connection, I want to know about that. I'm interested, and I'm interested in what comes up for him or what he might share. And you know, sometimes I see a different aspect of Liam, or he'll say, "Oh, you know, and she asked me this, and we had this conversation," and then it made me think about that. And there's that moment where I'm like, "Oh gosh, you know, I hadn't thought about you in that way, or we haven't spoken about that in a while." So, you know, because I guess a bit of a thing around it is that, you know, when you connect with different people sort of, you can share different aspects of yourself with different people. So even though Liam and I are so familiar, and I feel like I know him, you know, so deeply, and I do, there might still be, you know, new things that come up for you if you're in conversation with someone else, because they're a different person and they're engaging with you in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which comes back to, and I know that you get asked this, and about the jealousy aspect of it. And then, so for someone who's not as evolved, they still feel that I use the word evolved in terms of evolving a jealous standpoint. You talk, what's the word? Compersion, right? So I imagine I'm putting Ali and I in this situation, and Al's now sitting with another fellow, and she comes home, and I go, "How'd it go?" You know, with old mate. And already I can feel myself going, "How'd it go with old mate? You know, you weren't with me," sort of thing. Oh, he was great. He asked me about XYZ. Now I'm already self-flagellating and going, "Fuck, I should have asked her about why this guy, she's going to like him way better than me. I'm going to be out the door any minute now."
Well, I would almost take the hypothetical back a step. I would say, let's say we're on the golf course and Barry is playing.
I like the golf course.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to start at the golf course.
Barry back in.
Okay, and you guys are playing around together, and you are at the 13th hole.
Yeah.
Okay, and Barry is on the other green, but he can kind of see over to you guys on the 13th hole.
Yeah.
That would be the moment to start to be like, how would you feel if Barry was just on another hole, seeing what's going on on the 13th hole?
Yeah.
You know, that would be the moment to be like, how do we feel about like the exhibitionism of that, and how would we feel about that inside ourselves before jumping to like the most intense version of the scenario where it's like,
I see where you're going.
you know, because sometimes like that could be really exciting once you start to kind of dip your feet into those conversational fantasy territories. And I would say, you know, something that we say to people is like, just explore that. It doesn't have to be full send. You know, you don't have to imagine being in an orgy of 200 people. You know, it's like you can really just kind of explore these
There's
concepts.
my fantasy shop.
Yeah, there we go. That can happen at the golf course, at the club afterwards. Yeah.
Both of you, is it exciting sexually when you're like when you're attracted to another woman and you're having a great time with her? Does that excite you sexually, or is it more just you're happy that Liam's happy? Is there a sexual excitement to it as well?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is different.
Yeah.
For me, there is.
Yeah.
That is sort of how compersion looks for me.
Right.
More so than the thought of Liam forming a deep, loving bond where they're like, you know, they're having big getaways and going for picnics and all these sort of non-sexual activities. While I think that's really lovely, and I'm not like against it, it's not really, that's a more neutral space for me.
Yeah.
And then dependent if I'm premenstrual or things like that, those jealousy feelings that come up for nearly everybody will get exacerbated.
Right,
So
gotcha.
it's also very interesting for me with my hormonal landscape, sort of how I it's like the compersion and the jealousy knobs, they're going up and down and, all of that. So trying to be gentle on myself with that. And Liam's always been aware of that too. So being sensitive to each other. But I think a lot of it also comes down to who the person is, who at the moment, and for a while now, Liam has a wonderful lover, and she's also our friend, and she dates other people. But we go for coffee together, the three of us. Sometimes her and I go and write together. We have that baseline of friendship. I trust her. I have a connection. I have that metamor connection. So metamor, your partner's partner. And that's really lovely, and I feel really safe in that connection. So, she's not moving into our family. She's not trying to pull our marriage apart or anything like that.
What would happen if that did enter in? You got a whiff of that. You're clearly an emotionally intelligent, sensitive person. You pick up a whiff of that. You're getting like, what happens then?
We're pretty intuitive people, I would say. I would pick up on that very early on. And I think a lot of that also comes down to what somebody is looking for. She's not looking for this particular primary person. She's really enjoying being a solo polyamorous. So she first and foremost dates herself and then dates other people. So if she was looking to build family and find a husband and she was looking towards Liam for that, we're not compatible because that's not available in our way of being non-monogamous.
And I think it's about compatibility with partners. Sometimes what we're looking for might not be compatible with other partners, and that's a question about communicating with each other what we're looking for, but also communicating with other potential partners and saying, look, if this is exactly what you're looking for, I don't think, even if we may be aligned on a bunch of things, it might not be the greatest of fits.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can tell if someone's looking for more or and then it's someone's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
In the Do you feel a responsibility to advocate and educate people on non-monogamous relationships?
Look, I don't see us as educators, but we're storytellers, and we're happy to share our own personal experience because we're in a privileged place to be able to do that. And when I say privileged, I mean we have the love and support of our families, we have our friends, we have that security. We're not going to be sort of excommunicated from our, from our parents or anything. So with that, we feel comfortable to talk about our relationship and then, hope to open up a space where other people can share about their relationship. But we're not educators. We're not therapists. We're storytellers, I would say, in that space. So, yeah.
Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. I think the sense of responsibility comes with a bit of a bigger platform and the importance of making sure that all the conversations we have remain centered around ethics and doing things ethically and also destigmatizing alternative things. I think if we can do whatever we can to kind of push the conversation forward a little bit and maybe act as an example of people doing things ethically that are non-monogamous, I think there is some responsibility that comes with that I think we both feel. And just to make sure that we're having conversations in good faith, across the spectrum.
Yeah. Can I ask you this? What advice do you have for couples who are considering this opening of a relationship?
I would say look into other people's stories, hear how they're doing it, listen to some non-monogamous podcasts. There are some really great ones out there.
Well, hey.
We have one, but there are others as well.
Okay.
Yeah. There are some fantastic books, Polysecure by Jessica Fern, Sex at Dawn by Dr. Christopher Ryan and Cecile de Geetha. There are some fantastic books out there. There are researchers, but you also don't need to rush into things. I would say go slow. Keep it in the fantasy, talk about the hypotheticals, sort of have a process of, talk through what might come up as you're discussing it. Sit with it. Don't rush because you don't want to shock yourself.
Yeah.
It's not an end race. It's not just sort of, it's a process like any relationship. It's not an end goal.
And also to come to it from a place of strength. You never want to use non-monogamy as like, oh, there's been infidelity, so let's open up the relationship. Or, the relationship isn't going great, maybe non-monogamy will solve everything. I think a bit of advice that when we were starting to open up, someone said that non-monogamy is almost like a magnifying glass. And if you hold it over your relationship, and if your relationship is already strong and you have strong communication, these things will blossom and bloom within a non-monogamous context. But if there are cracks, if you don't have great communication, if you take each other for granted or you're using it as a band-aid, it's going to be very difficult and could, completely implode the relationship. So just really understanding where you're coming from within your current relationship before kind of looking outwards.
Yeah.
So interesting.
When you began, and did someone tell you to take? I think what you just said, Abby, was absolutely beautiful. Just small steps, be gentle, patient, kind. I guess kind with yourself and your partner. Was that what how you were being mentored when you first came in?
Yeah, that was how we approached it. We spoke about potentially opening up our relationship for almost a year before we acted on that. And then we started going to some talks about non-monogamy and different discussions. So, not diving into that sort of sexual experiences of it, but learning about it and meeting other people was really important.
And finding great examples of non-monogamous relationships, because we were so fortunate to meet people who'd been married 30 years and non-monogamous for 20 years. Like people who had really had so much life experience, and we just gravitated towards, just like Abby was saying about storytelling, we gravitated towards the stories, and that's what we try to do in regards to anything, like monogamous relationships that are beautiful and fruitful, and your story is also an incredible one. And so I think just looking for those beautiful like stories of connection and trying to take as much as we can from those.
I think for me, the thing about the both of you that really strikes me is, monogamy, non-monogamy, whatever. It's just, I think if everyone just took home the amount of communication that you both have is really actually inspiring and incredibly beautiful. And this is why you can be whoever you want to be in this marriage, because you're so open with each other. And that's everything. I mean, relationship 101 is communication. No one says anything different than, how do I get on the same plane with my husband, wife? It's communication, and you've got it so beautifully happening within the two of you. So it's to, kudos to both of you.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you.
Let's do the pulse. So we do a little thing at the end where
exciting.
Short answers.
Short and sweet.
But can you both answer the same question? Okay.
At the same time?
No.
Everyone asks that. It's like, go. Yeah.
We want to hear your answer. Okay. Liam's got a big voice. He's okay, for question number 1, what brings you joy?
Curiosity and fun.
Yeah.
Or like, I guess, specific examples. Talking, family time.
Family, parenting, each other, creativity, curiosity.
Yeah.
There you go.
Is there one time that you would love to revisit in your life?
I think our
Maybe the
New York chapter.
New York chapter, yeah.
We love New York, and I proposed to Abby in New York at the Met Opera in the
Wow.
foyer. Like, those moments hold a deep place in my heart.
beautiful.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. The New York chapter, we miss it dearly.
Do
It
you miss-
almost feels like Narnia now.
Yeah.
Do you miss
That's
the
how I think about it.
the bagels?
Oh,
Always.
yes.
Every day I
Oh.
miss those bagels.
Oh,
How good's a New York bagel?
oh
good.
so good.
I heard, you know why? Why they taste so good? It's the water.
Oh,
Yeah, it's the water. It's the New York water. It's the same with Guinness beer.
oh.
Like they send the
Right.
concentrate over from Dublin, and they mix it with the New York water.
It's not the same.
There you go.
Well, no, it tastes really great.
The Guinness is best in Ireland. Don't tell me it's
Oh,
there
no,
in
well,
Scotland. Squeeze me.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the
Yeah,
Irish
yeah, but-
Irish people screaming at
The
you
Irish
right
people
now.
are happy about. That's why they love New York so much, because their Guinness beer tastes just as good, because it's the New York water,
Anyway.
which makes the bagels and the pizza bases taste so
Next
I love it.
question.
New York
Amazing.
pizza. All right. What do you miss when you're not... So I digress. What do you miss when you're not together?
Oh, look, we're always in touch.
We do message each other a lot. Like, there's like 20,000 photos in our, camera roll just to each other in WhatsApp. Like, it's
We're never not in contact.
Right.
There's always something happening. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I definitely, there's been moments, there's been times where, we haven't chatted, I'd probably say the longest is like a day or two. Like,
Yeah.
it's really not that long that we're apart from each other. But I think there's certainly an amount of time where I just find myself missing, like, the companionship. We have so much fun together. We're always laughing. There's always something funny happening. Like non-monogamy, also there's so many constellations of different things to talk about, and so there's
a lot of funny things.
There's a lot of funny things that go on.
Yeah.
So I think whenever we don't talk, for an extended period of time, it's kind of, for me, it's the humor and just the communication.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. One word to describe each other.
Oh, so many words. That's a hard question.
So I would say wise for you. You even from when we first met, when you were a young man of 21, you've always had you've had wisdom and intuition, but also you're hilarious.
I'll take
I
wise.
can't do
That's very
one
nice.
word.
That's beautiful.
I just feel like you are. I know that's a weird thing to say about a man in your mid-30s, but you are.
That's very kind. I would say curious. And something that I'm endlessly attracted to in Abbey is just this sense of curiosity, not just for relationships, but for life, for the way she moves through the world. Her friendships, she's always curious about other people. She's interested in connecting. I think the curiosity feeds into that. It feeds into being a creative person. So I would say curiosity.
Beautiful.
Can you just share a couple of funny... Is there funny experiences in non-monogamy?
Oh, yeah.
Always.
Can you share
I think
like
one of
a story?
the funniest experiences when we were kind of initially opening up and we were meeting up with a couple up in Boston.
Yes.
And so we we met these people online. We were down in Nashville at the time, and we kind of met online, and we're going to catch up in Nashville, but we crossed paths, and we weren't able to meet up in Nashville. So they lived in Boston, we were in New York.
But we were ships in the night.
So we're like, okay, let's catch up in Boston. And so everything was online. We were talking lots. We were sending photos. They were lovely, and then we started to get a little bit convinced that they were catfishing us and that they weren't real people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So we drive 4 hours up to Boston.
Yes.
Right. And we're at this restaurant where they told us to kind of meet them. And then the excuses start coming in.
It's like
Right?
running a little bit late. Something's come up. We'll be there soon.
And
I started to get paranoid, and I was looking around this restaurant, and there was this man sitting in the corner, and I said, I bet it's
that's
him.
him. That's the
This isn't
catfish
the
right over
couple.
there.
There's something definitely going on.
And the excuses also became even more elaborate. Like we knew that he was a firefighter, and he was like, oh, I had to go to a firefighter funeral, so this is why I'm late. And we're like, okay, like no worries, like no rush. And it got to the point where they were like over an hour
we were
late,
about
right?
to leave.
We were about to leave. We were like, we're going to finish our drink, and then we're out of here because someone is watching us, and this is like some crazy joke. And we had a nice Airbnb anyway, so we're like, oh, we're going to have a great time. This is just a funny experience. And then they rock up.
No.
And it was actually, they were real. And they were also just, we're very good friends to this day. And they're absolutely beautiful.
So this lovely couple.
Absolutely lovely. And the amazing part about that story is the reason they were late, and they hadn't shared this with us, they shared with us the next day because we exchanged kind of social media handles. And they said, the reason we didn't exchange social media handles with you guys before is we're actually parents, and we felt too embarrassed to say that we were non-monogamous and parents because we thought you might judge us. So just so you know, our Instagrams are full of, us, going to firefighting functions and with our kids.
With the kids fishing and
And
doing
so-
normal,
all of
doing
And
stuff.
the reason they were late was because they had babysitter problems. And they couldn't get
It was
that.
taking too long.
It was
to
taking
get out
too
of the
long,
door.
but they hadn't told us the reason. So they
wow.
they just were just freaking out about like
These
all the
elaborate
possible kind of excuses they could come up with, and so.
But that was really interesting because it also showed us the level of sort of judgment that can be, for them as parents to other non-monogamous people. I think because we weren't parents at the time then. So.
And then they also formed as beautiful examples of people who were non-monogamous, who also had a beautiful family life. Yeah. And that started the conversations.
Found them to be inspiring.
Yeah, we found them to be super inspiring and created conversations with us where we thought, maybe, we can be non-monogamous and great parents as well. This is a great example of that. And it was a crazy story, and there's so many things came out of it. But it was,
it's awesome. Yeah.
Exciting.
Curious and wise, Abbey and Liam. Thank you so much. I feel wiser and more experienced just being around you and experiencing this today. So thanks. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been a great chat.